Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debi Silber, and today's guest is Darrin Ford. And Darrin is a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified by the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists as a clinical supervisor of associate therapists. As co-founder of Sanos Center for Recovery, he has integrated mindfulness into the treatment of those struggling with addiction. He has also worked with mentoring therapists in the utilization of mindfulness and the development of their private practice. He has recently founded the Mindfulness Academy for Addiction and Trauma Training. In addition, Darrin is a nationally recognized speaker and internationally published author. His books include Awakening from the Sexually Addicted Mind, A Compassionate Guide to Recovery, co-author to Transforming the Addictive Mind, and co-author to The Recovery Coach Client Handbook. And we're diving into the topic of mindfulness today because of the power it has to change how you think, act, and react. It's a powerful tool in your toolbox as you look for healthy ways to heal. And my next guest, Darrin Ford, is going to explain exactly what it is, the benefits, and how to get started. You're going to love this conversation. Here's Darrin. Okay, everybody, we have Darrin Ford with us today, and you are in for such a treat because, we talk about a lot of ways to heal from betrayal physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and we have yet to speak about the benefit of mindfulness. So Darrin is going to share all that and so much more with us today. Welcome, Darrin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. So before we even get into it, talk to us about mindfulness. What is it? And what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
I think that's a wonderful question. And so first, mindfulness is, first, before we even talk about mindfulness, I think we need to back up and first define what is mind, right? We hear the buzzword mindfulness all the time, and you have to be mindful, but nobody really ever takes a moment to explain what the mind is. And so when you're viewing mindfulness, you really think of the mind as another sense organ, just like your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, and your skin. And you have the mind. And what the mind does is it takes in all of the information from your environment through those other sense organs. It organizes it, coordinates it, reflects on the past, and then spits out a hypothesis about your future. That hypothesis is never 100% correct. We can get close, but it's never 100%. And what mindfulness is just that, seeing that hypothesis for what it is, not identifying with that hypothesis. So the ability to see our thoughts and our beliefs, but not be our thoughts and beliefs. And the practice of mindfulness is allowing ourselves to not be them or not identify with them.
And that's a wonderful definition right there. And I know I started a mindfulness practice a while ago, and I'll be honest, I did not stick with it because I remember just hearing that you're supposed to just sort of watch your thoughts, like they're in a little cloud bubble. And I couldn't, at the time, I would see a thought, and then I would get emotionally involved with that thought.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the step? I mean, how do you prevent that? Is it just practice?
Well, I think what you just described, right, when you said I would see the thought and then I would see that I became emotionally wrapped up in it, right? That's the good news because you're seeing it, right? It's when we don't see it and we just are lost in it. That's right when we're not being mindful. So the moment we recognize that we're caught up in it, that is mindfulness. We realize that we're lost in our thought or we're lost in the emotionality or and we see it and we're able to go, oh, wait, I'm doing that again. Okay, now back to whatever my focus is, right? So that identification of, I'm doing that again is the good news. That is mindfulness. Our mind tricks us though and says, see, you're doing it all wrong. You just caught yourself not being mindful. So you're not being mindful. And it's like, but if you recognize that you're not being mindful, that's mindful.
Wow. Okay. So I was doing it then. I didn't even know. But how do you stop? Because I guess that's it. It's so easy. I find it's so easy just to get absorbed in whatever I'm doing and I'm not being mindful at all. How do we what do we do when we're sort of headed down that rabbit hole? How do we recognize? Is there a way to recognize that we're not being mindful and stop ourselves and actually be more present? What can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple, there's habits that have to be practiced, right? And that's why either, people will talk about in the more traditional old fashioned way of you sit and you kind of do this formal meditation. That's fine, but that's not really what I talk about. I talk about this idea of just incorporating mindful habits into your life. So doing small things like taking 30 seconds before you start your car as you sit there and to ask yourself, to check in with yourself, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I feeling? What are my shoulders like right now? Things like that. In the world of recovery, we talk about sober moments, which is, stop, observe, breathe, evaluate, and then respond mindfully, which can take anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes. And so you start to integrate these small interjections of mindfulness into your life in small little doses, not in these big formal old-fashioned ways. That doesn't work for our busy lives. It's not functional.
And I remember when I was in school, and I just graduated last year, going back from my PhD. One of the courses that I had to take was a mindfulness and meditation course, and every week, besides the papers and everything, we had to practice some sort of mindfulness activity. And I remember the week that it was is it called walking mindfulness or whatever it was? But yeah. You had to be so conscious and aware of the act of walking. And it was this real slow walking process. But I'll tell you, I was so amazed when I really stopped to think about it. Wow, my legs just know what to do. My foot knows to land. And I was so amazed by what we just do so automatically and we're not even realizing it. Is that something that is a mindfulness practice that helps us?
Absolutely. In fact, I tell people you can practice mindfulness standing, sitting, walking, lying, right? So in other words, you can practice mindfulness no matter what you're doing.
Lying down, not lying.
yeah, lying down, not the act of lying. Yeah, big difference there, right?
Got a lot of sensitive people listening.
yes, right. And so walking, right? Or like I love to run. I'm a runner. So, I'll get on that treadmill and I run and I practice that's my mindful practice. Then I feel the weight distribution on my feet. I feel how my feet are landing on the treadmill, what my shoulders are doing, right? My breath, taking those deep breaths in as I run to stay conditioned, right? But we can do that practice as formal as, okay, I'm going to run, or as lighthearted as, I'm going to walk from my car to the restaurant for lunch. And in that walk, I'm going to be very mindful. I'm going to put my phone away. I'm not going to have any electronic equipment for this, next 2 minutes. I'm going to walk from my car to the restaurant. Or even mindful eating. You take time when you eat, actually notice what the food tastes like. I have lots of people who, struggle with addiction and I'll have them when they struggle with smoking cigarettes to be very mindful, when they take a hit of the cigarette, keep the smoke in the mouth and ask themselves, what does this really taste like? Right. And all of them almost will say, when I did that, it tastes terrible. It's horrible. And then they start to create this conditioned response of you to the cigarettes, and then they quit.
Wow.
And there's studies on that.
And I can see, though, how being mindful when it comes to your food, you'd enjoy your food so much more, and you probably would be eating a whole lot less because you're actually enjoying what you're eating. So Talk to us about the difference between mindfulness and meditation, because mindfulness seems like you're supposed to be very present and concentrating on what you're doing, where meditation, you're supposed to sort of be letting go and not thinking of anything. Right?
Yeah. So, there's many different types of meditation. So the meditation that you just described is one of the most popular here in the West, and that's really like this idea of transcendental meditation, where you kind of go to this other place and you clear your mind and you go to this other place. Mindfulness meditation, and I put that in quotes, is not that, right? It's becoming more aware of your mind. So moving into your to identifying the thought processes. And so, in the formal type of meditation or traditional meditation, you would sit in a room or, something like that where you would, it would be very quiet. You would do this for 15, 20, even 45 minutes. A lot of the research that John Kabat-Zinn has done is around 45 minutes of meditation a day. And that's a way, that's a way to gain mindfulness, but it's not a very, in my opinion, practical way. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about mindfulness, I'm talking about weaving the practice of becoming aware of your mind into your everyday activities, right? So when you're in the car, turning off the radio and paying attention to what you're actually doing, that you're actually driving, feel what the road feels like, versus the traditional meditation where you sit in a silent room and you're dedicating 45 minutes to it and you're noticing your breath, identifying thoughts, coming back to breath, identifying thoughts, coming back to breath. I'm not saying that I don't have a negative view of traditional meditation, but that's not really what I try to argue. We try to explain one of the interventions that we try to use in the academy that I have. When we train therapists on mindfulness-based addiction therapy, it's helping an organic weaving of mindfulness into your everyday activities.
And you know what I love about this? It seems like it's teaching us to be much more present. So we're not kind of numbly going through our days, but it also changes the brain, doesn't it? I mean, it actually changes the brain. Tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So first, I love what you said about presence, right? Because that's the byproduct of mindfulness, right? Is presence. And we actually can see that idea of presence organically in the brain, right? So we know that people who struggle with addiction or who struggle with any type of compulsive behaviors, including using your phone all the time, we actually see a degradation of the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, which is basically a medical way of saying the amount of nerve connections in your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that represents the oldest part of self, right? So that reasoning, judgment, and the ability to see the consequences of your outcomes, of your choices, right? That's all in the prefrontal cortex. So we'll see with people who struggle with addiction or who have exceedingly long internet usage, things like that, you'll see a degradation in those neural connections in the prefrontal cortex. And what we see in people who practice mindfulness is we'll actually see increased neural connections in that prefrontal cortex. We'll see richer, denser gray matter, which basically correlate, and this is on fMRI studies that are done by Richard Davison out of the University of Wisconsin and several other people. And it's been pretty well established now that this is part of the neuroplasticity of the brain. And when you have those denser neural connections, you actually find that people have greater ability to pause before they impulsively react in situations. There are people who have a denser gray matter in their prefrontal cortex are less likely to be involved in addictive or compulsive behaviors, things like that. And so we've seen all of that research, and they're also more apt to be able to have what's called an equanimic or a neutral reaction to their emotions. So when their emotions arise, they don't impulsively react to them. They can move into the feeling, but not lash out in response to the feeling. And this is the part that has been so important for trauma survivors.
Okay, so a few things there that you said. I've always heard that word equanimity when it comes to mindfulness. So I definitely want you to explain what that is, just so everybody knows. Neuroplasticity, I want you to explain that as well. And when it comes to, you mentioned something about being less reactive. The more, I guess, when our prefrontal cortex is, let's say, healthier, stronger. So, yeah. Right. So now everybody listening here has been struggling to heal from a betrayal experience. How could mindfulness help them be less? So what you're saying is mindfulness can help them be less reactive. Like, let's say there's a trigger. Are you saying that they wouldn't react the same way or as quickly or as deeply or as something like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's not that they wouldn't feel the emotion connected to the trigger. It's that the way that they react to that emotion would be different or would be more constructive versus destructive, right? And so I'll talk about that, but let's back up first and let's talk about a couple of these things. First, neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is an amazing thing, and it's it just to this day it baffles my mind, but it's also so exciting. When I was being taught at in school years ago, they said, "Hey, look, you're born with the brain you have, and that's it. And if you mess it up and you kill your nerves, there's never going to be any new ones that grow back, and it's all over with." And so that kept me out of drugs for a long time when I was younger, But we come to find out it was completely wrong. I mean, totally wrong. And neuroplasticity is actually our ability to develop new neurons or to create new neural pathways in our brain. And if you think about it, it makes total sense. When you're studying material, let's say academically, and you're reading something, what you're actually doing is you're creating new neuronal pathways, new nerve pathways in your brain. That's what helps you form memory. Same thing with behavior. So if you behave in a way that's impulsive, then you are more likely to behave impulsively in the future because the brain adapts and believes that impulsive reactivity is what's needed for you to survive. And this, for trauma survivors, right? When you think about trauma, what is demanded of us when we've experienced trauma? What is demanded of us is quick reaction in order to protect and sustain ourselves, right? And so this happens, let's say we have a traumatic event, whether it's an emotional, an intense, short, duration traumatic event or a traumatic event that's low intensity, but over a long period of time, the impact is still the same, right? We have that instinctual, I have to survive reactionary pattern that is created. We can actually see that in the brain in fMRI studies. And that's beautiful because that's what we needed to survive. But now that situation is over and we're in a different situation.
So I'm going to stop you here because I just want to sum this up for everybody. So what this could represent is your, let's say, discovery day of your betrayal, whether it's by a family member, partner, friend, or sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, which could be your getting out of a relationship with a narcissist.
Correct. Absolutely correct, right?
Okay.
And the impact of that trauma is the exact same, right? And so now you're out of that situation, but your brain and now your mind, because of the way your brain has adapted, and we can talk about what comes first, the brain adaptation or the mind, and that's still a point of debate, but I have my biases. However, you're not in that situation, but your mind and your brain are saying, well, we needed this reactionaryism to survive in the past, so that's what we need now because that helped then. Right? But the situation, the environment has changed and we don't need it anymore. So we find ourselves reactionary to situations that don't call for it. And then we project self-judgment because we're reacting to our sense of shame, and we start to question our own perception of reality and start to question ourselves. And we go into this spiral as trauma survivors, down, 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 and feel less and less self-efficacy, less and less self-control, less, and more judgment. And then this creates a spiral of more and more kind of not trusting ourselves, grasping outside of ourselves for help. And then we suffer even more, which causes a feedback loop because the brain says, oh, we're in trauma again. We need to create more of these reactionary neural pathways. And then it just becomes the big word is reciprocally deterministic relationship, right? So the cause and the effect become a loop that perpetuates that trauma cycle.
Now, I can see this being the perfect point for addiction.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's that. And addiction definitely arises out of that, right? Because addiction's all about, distraction. It's all about, detaching from the discomfort of the moment and trying to survive,
So here now, and just to unpack this a little bit, we have our trauma, whether it was our betrayal experience, whether it was just, that, like I mentioned before, the death by a thousand cuts sort of thing. We've created this survival type behavior. Now we can be out of the experience, but we've conditioned ourselves into behaving this way. Now we're so uncomfortable with the way we're feeling that we need some relief, and we find some sort of addiction. So get us out of this mess, Darrin. What do we do?
Yeah. So that's great, right? And so, there's one aspect too that we didn't is still left out there that I want to clarify, right? The more we participate in reactionary relationships to our emotions, the more our emotional distress tolerance muscles degrade, right? So the more that they atrophy, and the more that they atrophy, the less emotional impact, the less emotional energy it takes to cause us to become reactionary, right? So the level of emotional distress, even if it's lower than what it was before, will cause a higher reactionary response, if that makes sense.
Okay, so to sum that up, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's like we've had it, and we just don't have the tolerance that we had previously.
Oh, correct. And so we go through our lives, and then that we've had it part comes to the surface quicker and quicker and quicker, and we have less and less tolerance for emotional distress.
Like a shorter wick.
Yes, yeah, shorter fuse, shorter. Absolutely. Okay. Now, so we're in this mess, and we're like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, how do I get out of this? Well, the first step in that is first recognizing that it's not you. It's the mind that has created this coping mechanism. You are the observer of this mind, right? You're the thing that sees your thoughts, that sees the mind's reaction. You're the one that has the ability to see that, and then once you see it, you can make a choice. I'm not saying that's an easy choice. I'm not saying that when you choose not to react in the addictive, compulsive way, that you won't feel a lot of emotional distress. You absolutely will. However, that's what's needed. And there's a very famous saying in Buddhist psychology, which is, if it's in the way, it is the way.
Oh, I love that. If it's in the way, it is the way.
So if our mind, if we're in trauma recovery or an addictive cycle, and our mind says, I don't want to feel this, or I don't want to go to this meeting, or I don't want to go to therapy, or I don't need therapy. For example, if we're a partner, right? I don't need therapy. It's the addict. I don't need it. It's all them. It's like, well, you've experienced trauma. So the mind is defending against your emotional distress related to that. And by going to therapy, you're moving into that emotional distress, which is enormously uncomfortable. And the recovery of that trauma it was caused by the addict's choices.
Right. So how do we know if it's the mind sort of not playing tricks on us, but helping us in its own way? If it's the mind, or if it's our highest wisdom telling us what we need?
Yeah, I think by really practicing getting to know what the emotions feel like, how they show themselves in our body and our lives, to really move close and have an observational relationship to our thoughts, our feelings, our thoughts, our beliefs, our behaviors, our habits, right? And I often tell people, right, emotion, they move us, right? They're an unconscious feeling. So they drive our thoughts. Our thoughts coalesce into beliefs. Mm-hmm. Our beliefs manifest into behaviors. Our behaviors are practiced into habits, and our habits become our destiny. And so if we are able in anywhere in those 5 steps, if we're able to interject mindfulness, we pretty much sabotage the reactionary habitualized habits. right? And then we're able to get to know our mind very well. And then we can identify, is this our wise mind or a reactionary mind, right? But that takes time, and it takes consistency, and most importantly, it takes self-compassion.
And I love that you said that, because compassion is something that we're really not that great at, especially if we believe we believe the betrayal was, even though it was done to us, we believe it's about us. Then we're not as good at the compassion piece.
Right. And so it's so important, right? What you said, we think it's about us. There's that identification, right? We have pain. We identify that, oh, this must be my fault, right? Because if we blame ourselves, we have some sort of power, right? That this is because I'm not enough, or because I don't look good enough, or because they're acting out in their sexually addictive ways because I'm not smart enough, I'm not cute enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough. But it is in no way because of the way I look or the way I am. It's because they, have their own issue. And so, there's that component, right? And when we can separate that identification, we start to heal. And you had asked me a question, and I lost the second half of that question.
Equanimity.
There it is. Yes, that's right. So now we come into this idea of what is equanimity, right? And what is equanimity? And I say in my book, Awakening from the Sexually Addicted Mind, A Compassionate Guide to Recovery, I talk about equanimity as, if there was a goal to any type of recovery, this would be it. Now, a lot of people in addictive world will say, absolutely not. It's sobriety and how dare you, right? And I think that sobriety, spirituality, all of these things organically arise out of this idea of equanimity. So what is equanimity? Equanimity is a awareness to the emotional energy without an impulsive reactivity to it. It is not suppression of that emotional energy. It is not withdrawal from it. It is not in any way anything like that. So an equanimic person is a person that is the calm in the eye of the emotional storm. They feel it. They see the winds and the tempest and the currents and the chaos, and they're able to stay completely focused and present in it, even though they have a lot of distress, right? And if you think about as therapists, that's what we do. That's our goal as a therapist, right? To bear witness to the struggle of the other person's suffering, to be present with them in their hour of need. And in order to do that, we have to be able to see our own emotional response, but not react to it. Just see it. And this is equanimity. And out of that arises all of these beautiful things, the ability to foster connection, compassion, intimacy, all of these things arise organically out of that. This is a tall order. I've been practicing mindfulness obsessively for, decades. I'm not there yet.
Well, I love that you said that, because the little bit that I delved into it when I did, it was really, really challenging. I can so see the benefit, and you explained so many, you explained it so beautifully. It's so worth it to try it again. But I'm glad you said that it takes time, because, it sounds very challenging, but so worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where compassion comes in, right? And I often tell people compassion is a verb. It's not, it's not a noun. It's action, right? And in one of my other books, Transforming the Addictive Mind, I talk about how there's this woman who, there's a story, if you indulge me very quickly, but it illustrates compassion. Mm-hmm. So she heard a knock on the door, and she went to the door, and the police were there, and she said, "Oh God, what has he gotten himself into?" And I'm paraphrasing this story, but what has he gotten himself into now? And the police officer said, "Miss Smith, I'm so sorry to tell you, but your son has passed away. He's been killed. He was shot in a gang shooting," and things like that. Well, she was obviously devastated, and she went to the trial, and the perpetrator was a 14-year-old young boy. who killed her son, who shot her son. And, she stayed through the whole trial. And at the end, the victim's family always has the opportunity to share something. So she stood up and she looked the young boy in the eye, and she said very clearly in the courtroom, "I am going to kill you." And of course, everybody in the courtroom was like, "Oh my gosh," So as time went on, she started visiting this kid in jail, and she started buying him toiletries and buying him things because nobody came to visit him. He had no family, nobody. Once he turned 18, he got out. She asked him to come live with her, and he agreed because he had nowhere to go. And, she started to care for him, and she, taught him as he got older, she taught him how to, pay bills and get a job and ethics and, all of these things. And then one day after time went by, on his 21st birthday, she sat down as he was eating, and she looked at him and she said, "Do you remember in the courtroom when I said I would kill you?" And the boy just froze in fear,
Mm-hmm.
and he set his spoon down and he said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I did. The boy who had all of the anger that could have shot my son is now gone. And now what stands before me is an honest, honorable, a hardworking, responsible young man. I want to know if I can adopt you as my son."
Oh my gosh.
That is a true story. That really happened. That is compassion. Compassion is the action and believe me, that woman, each night when she went to bed and the perpetrator of the murder of her son was in her home and in his room, she was angry. And she was, she felt those emotions, but she didn't react to them. And this is for those of us who've experienced betrayal. We want to be able to forgive. Oftentimes, like we'll say, "You know what, I forgive you. We'll make the marriage work." But what we're actually saying when we say "I'll forgive you" is we're saying, "I will work and be present with, in a compassionate manner, those really, really uncomfortable emotions that I'm experiencing. I will ask for help so that I can figure out a way to work with this so that the relationship we have will continue."
And like you said, and I've found in doing this work, it is the death of the old and the
Yes.
rebirth of the new. It is never the same marriage, never the same two people. Yeah. Darrin, you have given us such a gift today and really shed so much light on a much needed topic. Where do we go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so there's several ways. I'm doing so much. So I have, which I'm doing with the amazing Mari Lee, who I just have to give a shout out to. She is an incredible coach.
And a wonderful guest. We had a great interview.
Great. Yeah. I mean, she's just incredible. I just bow to her wisdom over there at Growth Counseling Services. But for me, I own Sano Center for Recovery, which is a treatment center that we work with sex addiction and other addictions and also betrayal. We have offices in Newport Beach, California, Long Beach, California, and West Los Angeles. You can also, I own a publishing company that specializes in working with people in the mental health field. For all of those people that had the dream of writing a book, we walk you through it shoulder to shoulder from concept all the way to shelf. And we will guide you through the whole process. And then the most important jewel in my crown right now is the Mindfulness Academy for Addiction and Trauma Training, or TMAT. It's TMAATT.com. That's TMAATT.com. And TMAT is a academy that is certifying people in mindfulness-based addiction therapy, or MBAT certifications. And to learn more about that, you can sign up for our interest lists or waiting list there at tmat.com. And there's all kinds of information about that. And those are the things that I'm doing.
Those are some amazingly important resources. And everybody, I hope you listened. And what I'll do is I'll share all of that in the show notes as well. Darrin, again, thank you so much for your compassion, your wisdom, and all you brought to everybody listening today.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Holy moly. Darrin shared so much great information on how our brains handle trauma, leaving us with a shorter fuse, although he explained it much more eloquently than that. Stay in touch with Darrin by going to tmaatt.com, and we'll have all of his information in the show notes at pbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. Trauma can easily lead to addiction because we're trying to escape those painful emotions. But as Darrin shared in that beautiful Buddhist psychology quote, if it's in the way, it is the way. Wow. I also love that story he shared about that woman whose son was killed. What an incredible example of compassion and transformation. So many great nuggets. I hope you loved this episode as much as I did. Now, it's time for a gift. Head over to pbtinstitute.com and receive my gift of how your biggest crisis reveals your greatest gift. And let us support you. Go to Facebook and join our group, Women Hacking Betrayal, where we give information, tools, and support to help you move forward and heal once and for all. Can't wait to be with you next time, and here's to your breakthrough.